Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first event in the AJS Conversation Series, titled Dance and Disability in Israeli and Jewish Contexts. This conversation series features panels that were initially accepted to the December 2021 AJS conference in Chicago, but which had to cancel due to COVID. In a moment, we'll introduce the panelists. I'd first like to thank my colleague, Dr. Samantha Cooper, for her leadership in organizing today's event. I'd also like to thank Dr. Gordon Dale and Mr. Michael Levitt of the Jewish Music Forum, a project of the American Society for Jewish Music, who sponsored today's session. And thank you all for joining us today. If questions come up for you that you'd like to ask the panelists during the session, please direct message them to Sam Cooper, individually messaging rather than messaging the whole group, so we don't disrupt the flow of the speakers. I'll now hand the floor over to Sam Cooper.
Wonderful, thank you so much. We are delighted to have you all here today and very excited to feature this really important up and coming scholarship. So let's see, who will be going first today? Will it be Neely maybe? Yeah, okay, perfect. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen and then Neely will take it away. Go ahead, Neely, whenever you're ready.
Okay. So I'm happy to be here. My name is Dr. Neely Breuer. I'm from the Center for Disability Study in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And my talk is going to be on hiding her face to face the creep body in Riva Lehr's self-portrait. So Riva Lehr is a known Jewish American, disabled or creep, as some of us prefer, and a queer woman artist and a leading figure in the disability art movement. Did you move to the next slide of Riva Lehr?
Done.
Okay. She is best known for her painting of disabled artists and activists, and it was stated that her art is politically dominant ideas about disability and the body. One of her most successful body of work, what name Circle Stories, portraits of disabled scholars and artists. But for the purpose of presentation, I turned the attention to a couple of self-portraits. Throughout this paper, I explored 3 of Riva Lehr's self-portraits, in each of which her face is intentionally omitted from the painting. Based on the Emmanuel Levinas and Erving Goffman theoretical frameworks, I wish to offer a new reading of faces in the context of stigma and disability art nurtured by Jewish thought. While Levinas is commonly known as a Jewish philosopher, Goffman is rarely considered as one. Therefore, throughout my presentation, I actively search for Jewish perspectives in my study. Ultimately, I argue that Lehr's artistic decision to expose the creep body while leaving her face unapproachable is a political act that destabilizes the power dynamic of the ableist gaze. I will just say a word about the term creep. So creep is a term that was a negative to disabled people, but was transformed when nichsuto, when disabled people chooses as the name to label themselves and acquire it with a new meaning that are much more political and radical. It's quite similar to the move that LGBTQ did with queer. So I want to read a bit of Riva quotes of article that I wrote during the pandemic experience now. She's in that quotes. She's saying that the last person, she's the last person who wants the faces to disappear. She's saying that I'm a portrait artist. Faces are my whole life. She also saying that the virus has stolen your face from me. It's even stolen my face from myself. I use my face, people reaction to my body, my curved spine, my orthopedic boots, my silver red hair, my limp. I beam out my expression and my words to defend myself against harassment, against ignorance, against being ignored. So in this quote, I argued that she echoes some of Levinas, Emmanuel Levinas' ideas about the face and how it's calling us to take responsibility. To the humanistic Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, the face is a material expression of the other that cannot be assimilated within the self. In his words, it is a trace to the infinite that cannot be absorbed by the Western totality of the same. The philosopher Haggai Knan explains that for Levinas, the face resists the rule of the gaze, or more precisely, the face is itself resistance. It resists objectification and escapes the dominant confinement into a sign. As a result, Levinas argues that face possesses the unique ability to awaken the moral and to command thou shall not kill, לא תרצח. In this sense, erasing the face is a negation of that ethical potential that comes with the face-to-face encounter. I want to also read the quote of how Emmanuel Levinas defined the face. So the way in which the other presents himself, exceeding the idea of the other in me, we here name face. So it's encountering the otherness of the other person. This mood does not consist in figuring as a theme under my gaze, in spreading itself forth as a set of qualities forming an image. The face of the other at each moment destroys and overflows the plastic image it leaves me. So the face are conveying something bigger, something more extent than the image we used to see reality through. We are all the time identifying reality and what's around us through the symbols and signs that we acquire in society and culture. And Levinas here is saying that faces can escape that. They can extract from this totality of sameness that we are learning to live through in our Western society. Next page, please. Erving Goffman is actually offering a very different approach to the faces. Before I'm going to explain how he identified the face, I wanted to connect Goffman to the Jewish context. So while Levinas is acknowledged as being a Jewish philosopher that based himself in the Jewish thinking, Erving Goffman is a very known sociologist from a Jewish family in Canada that is not being acknowledged at all as being Jewish. In his writing, there is no significant work on Jewish people or Jewish culture or heritage or history, even though he as a person was living between the two world wars and experienced anti-Semitism in Canada that was rising in that time when he was a child and an adult. But his work that was produced after the Holocaust have no reference to the Holocaust, to the wars, to the state of Jewish people. But it seems that this part of his efforts to distinguish himself out of the Jewish community is part of the thing that also influenced his work and embedded in his thinking. His work is considered to be apolitical, ahistorical, but his activity as a Jewish man was trying to disconnect himself from the Jewish identity and perhaps even to pass as a non-Jew. And his work is a lot around how we are trying in our everyday life, we are trying to project an identity that will be the most positive and valued as we can. So his decision can be acknowledged as developed out of an anti-Semitism environment and not something that was neutral. And I'm going to reflect on that in connecting it to Riva. Can you pass to the next slide, please? So Goffman, when he is talking about faces, he's giving it as a different definition than Levinas. He says that the term face may be defined as the positive social value a person effectively claims for himself by the line others assume he has taken during a particular contact. Face is an image of self delineated in terms of approved social attributes, albeit an image that others may share. So if Levinas want to disconnect himself, the face, from the image, Goffman is actually embracing the concept of the image and follow it when he's thinking on the faces. He's saying that people all the time play personas and project a self that other need to acknowledge and approve. And this image is something that we are all constructing together in an encounter. It's something that is happening between us as a human being that is interacting together. Next slide, please. It seems that Riva Lers is also resonate with some of those ideas when she's saying in that same article that I think of the human face as a theater that performs the actor inside, in flickers and puckers and pools of 49 tiny muscles in the rise and fall of blood that swirls with our emotions. So she also referred to the metaphor of a performance and theater that Goffman is very known as in doing that. Next slide, please. Evan Goffman is also familiar with his work on stigma. He identifies stigma as the reduction of the other person from a whole and usual person to a tainted, discounted one. He's saying that by definition, we believe the person with the stigma is not quite human. In his work, he referred to different groups and different attributes as the one that can cause stigma. He does not refer, by the way, to Jewishness as the one that can cause stigma, but he does saying that Christianity is a very significant part of the identity of the normal in the US. Next slide, please. So you can stay here in this slide. So I wanted to add this circle in the pictures that it's also recognized that stigma is working in interaction and it's constructed in between us as people that communicate and read the situation and read the other person's faces, you can say. We are a tribute to the other person values or taking their human value if we are consider them as having stigma, as having something that reduces their value and discriminate them as different as others. So I'm going to argue that faces are in problematic state when we're thinking on the encounters with people that are being stigmatized. People that are being labeled under stigma and being disgraced are not able to communicate different faces to the other person in their interaction. They are considered to be two others, too different than to be a person that can own a face, that can have a positive image that they can project to society. Next slide, please. And so instead of a face, I'm offering, instead of a face, I'm sorry. Instead, I'm sorry, Siri started to pass by. Instead of a face, I'm going to offer the concept of the mask, and more specifically, a mask of disgrace. If a face is an image of a self and it has a positive social value, then the mask of disgrace is a negative, negative social value in its definition. It's located in the scope, in the space of in-betweenness, and it's also lodged in or on the concrete face. So it's also working on the body itself. In face, like I said, it's in between. It's diffusely located in the flows of events and not part of the person's actual body. In faces, there is an impression management that Goffman is defining as the way that people working on how they are being presented to the world and what identity they're going to acquire. In Mask of Disgrace, there is a management of spoiled identity. You cannot own a positive face. You are all the time trying to work with the identity that is being spoiled, that was damaged already. In the faces, there is a temporal mutual agreement, but on mask, the body is being fixated and fetishized. Next slide, please. So I'm actually going to argue that Riva Lair, the artist, is working against the mask of disgrace in our self-portrait that she's going to cover her face, hide them in different ways that we're going to see here in the images. So the first image that I want to refer to is Blue Veronica. We see an image of a person that is the face is covered with a Röntgen picture, with a photograph that show us how the body, the bones are look like inside the person's body. So in this image, we are actually refer to the medical gaze, the clinical gaze, the way that the medical model actually construct disability and see it as something that is different, problematic, pathological. It's something that is out of the ordinary in a negative way. It's something that we need to fix or make or permit it from even happening if we're thinking about abortion. So the medical gaze is one of the gaze that is most significant when we're thinking about disabled people. It's the way that the medical discourse defined us as deviant, but it's also becoming a cultural discourse because of the dominant of this field of the medical space. So in this image, we cannot see Riva face, but we can see the thing that mediates the way that we are perceiving Riva as disabled. We we cannot see her face because it's become a mask of disgrace that cover her face and her identity. Our identity is being problematized. It becomes something that is othering and needed to be pushed away. But we also see her body and the way that she experienced this mediator of her identity and her body. She's seen in distress in this image. Our arms are hugging her body, and being intense, you can see the tension that she's in when she's encounter with this image of herself. And we can see also that the background is not the doctor office. It's outside. We can see the clouds. And it's also interesting that we can see feathers. I was wondering what the feathers might mean here. If it's going to make it a bit soften, if it's an effort to try and soften this situation, that it's very complex. It's maybe the experience of taking your feather out. If we can fly as different people that experience ourselves in a positive way and imagine different way for ourselves, this medical translation of us make us fixed in one position, in one identity, and under one label. It's like having a bird without feathers. Next slide, please.
Okay, we have about 2 more minutes left.
Oh my God. Okay, so I'm going to do it faster. So in this image that's called Cauda equina, we can see more clearly Riva Lair body and the embodiment of disability. She is also juxtaposing her body to the skeleton of her horse. It's an interesting connection that you are going outside of the human realm, but there is maybe an option of kinship and resemble to other animals, and trying to find connection to different living beings. There is also, again, the image of the body that have feelings and express them. I think the hands have the more expressive part in this image. Next slide, please, so I can also talk about the last image. So this email is called Zora, How I Understand. And we cannot see Riva's face because she's hugging her dog, Zora. And this image, I think, is adding the concept of staring. People with disability are not only negotiate the gaze and the medical gaze, but we are all the time being stared at in public realm, especially if our bodies are looking atypical or our behavior is conceived as such. So in this image, we don't see Riva staring back at us, but we do see the dog doing just that. And also, I don't know if you can notice that, but the leaves all around her have little eyes on them. And it seems like an animal's eyes, a lizard or something. So it's also, again, an animal life that is being joined to this conversation with society and trying to offer an alternative understanding of what disability or maybe human is. Next slide, please. So just to conclude, I want to argue that in some cases, the eraser of the face is a last resort to escape the confinement of stigma and its subjugation into a state of inferiority. By leaving her face unapproachable, Lehrer destabilizes the ableist gaze, power dynamic, and instead calls for an ethical encounter with the otherness of the body. If Levinas says us that faces the way that he articulated it are not necessarily the actual faces, but it's the thing that's going beyond our images. It's meeting otherness in our environment. So I'm going to argue that the bodies, the decrepit body, become the otherness that we need to look more ethically on. And by concealing her face, she's requesting us and demanding us to see it more ethically and acknowledge these differences in our different bodies. I will finish here. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so, so much, Julie. Nile, sorry. Would you like to have your Q&A session now, or would you like to combine all the Q&As and have them at the end? It's up to you as a group.
I think in the end, I prefer.
All right, perfect. So in that case, without further ado, I will screen share Dina's presentation, and I will play that for you off my computer as well. And at the end, before we start the Q&A, I'll post all of the bios so that you can see those. I just can't simultaneously have my screen clear and show you the presentation and post in the chat. So just give me 1 second.
I just want to apologize for the audience and explain that I'm not very well today, so I preferred to pre-record my talk. I thought I will not be here at all, so I said I might not be here. I am here, but my talk is still recorded. Thank you for understanding.
Absolutely. Okay, and without further ado, I will screen share now. Okay, and can everybody see this? Just nod at me or something. Great, okay, here we go. If there's any issues with sound, just try to flag me down because I see your faces, but not the chat.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dina Roginski. I'm sorry I cannot be with you in person, but I hope this recorded talk will be of interest. I would like to share my screen for the presentation. I'll be talking about the performances of the Jewish Israeli body from ideal to impaired. So as an abstract overview for my work, this is a socio-historical ethnographic analysis, and I'm analyzing the Israeli body as manifested in the Israeli folk dance movement from the early 1940s until the present day. I'm discussing various appearances of body, body image and capability, spanning a continuum from the most representative to the disabled. On one end, we find the state-sponsored folk dance groups that display the Sabra ideal body image of youth, beautiful looks, and agile movement, including Israeli Defense Force soldiers performing during the 1948 War of Independence. On the other end are various groups of impaired or other participants, among them disabled, special needs population, elderly, and LGBT, including Hoa Galgalim, representative troupe of disabled Israeli army veterans performing in the wheelchair. I'm discussing the differentiation between the physical body and the symbolic body, and the agency of the groups of others, the way they act to be included in the Israeli consensual collective body. My argument is that the field enables the acceptance of impaired bodies if they conform to its ideological principles of operation. To this end, the physical body, which is the ability to dance or even to move, assumes only a secondary standing, and it is replaced by the rising importance of the symbolic body and the legitimacy of belonging to the Israeli national collective. Let me give you some background about the Israeli folk dance movement that started in the early 1940s, mandatory Palestine, by the Jewish community there. The movement created a local, cultural, communal, entertaining activity for the socialist secular Jewish community, and it replaced the dancing practices of both the Jewish religious communities and the borrowed European folk dances. Rooted in the ideology of socialist Zionism and operating within labor movements, institutions, and the kibbutzim. The founding mothers of this movement were German-speaking Jewish immigrants who came to Palestine in the 1920s and 30s to create what I see as a national modern folklore in making. In 1944, the Kibbutz Dalia held the first dance festival in Jewish Palestine, and there less than 10 new Israeli folk dances were presented. Today, we see more than 10,000 dances, and this is a dynamic and regularly renewed expression of the Israeli culture. The dances represent foundations of the Zionist values in their music, in their lyrics, and in their gestures. The classical dances expressed collectivism, agricultural life, and love to the land. Until the 1980s, the field was institutionally governed by the Histadrut's folk dance section. Since the labor movement's loss of power and decentralization, the field is run by energetic Mizrahi men, both in creating new dances and in dancing the big dance sessions called in Hebrew halkadot. To this day, Israeli folk dancing is a consensual, mainstream Israeli familial activity and carries a deep national symbolic capital. I will talk a bit about the evolution of the Israeli folk dancing from ceremonial dances in the agricultural setting to the open to all popular dancing. Here we see photos of the first nature celebration created in Kibbutz Beit Alpha in 1931. That's called in Hebrew Chag HaGez, the fleece shearing holiday. The ceremonial dances for the holiday were arranged for the public participation in dancing. And here we see the two creators, the choreographer and dancer Leah Bergstein and the musician composer Matityahu Shelem. Here's another expression of agriculture in dance, the shepherd's dance in the Nahalal village. Here we see the circular Hoa dancing in Palestine of 1946, which really manifests the human chain, the equality, solidarity, and contact among the people in the dance, and the contact with the land, which clearly represents the values of socialist Zionism. Here's a photo of collective dancing in circles in Kibbutz Dalia. I mentioned that the first dance festival took place in 1944, and circle dances are the core of Israeli folk dancing repertoire to this day. Here's an example of couples dancing, also from Kibbutz Dalia, and alongside the collective circle dancing, couples dances were also created already in the 1940s to serve the Israeli youth and to add more of a one-on-one intimate contact in the folk dancing. Let me move to talk about the representative super body that is represented in Israeli folk dancing. The physical and symbolic body in the Zionist ideology, and we know that much research has been done on the construction of the new Hebraic Israeli Jew as an antithetic model of the old diasporic Jewish figure, especially with regards to the image of the ideal representative body. The Zionist model of Dr. Mark Snowdow for the masculine Judaism was presented at the Second World Zionist Congress in Basel in 1898, and it discussed the physical degeneration of the Jewish body in the diaspora and the need for the new Jewish body model that it could be materialized through physical education. That year, the first Zionist athletic club in Central Europe was established, Bar Kochva Berlin. The representative dance tropes. So Israeli folk dancing was presented on stage already in 1946. The first representative group, Hapoel Tel Aviv Dance Troupe, was established by Gurit Kadman. In German, her name was Gerd Kaufmann, the mother of Israeli folk dancing. In 1947, Kadman traveled with the troupe to perform in International Folklore Festival in Prague and continued onward to perform in other places, including displaced person camps for Holocaust survivors. Kadman described the meeting between the young subbers and the survivors in near metaphysical terms, emphasizing the extreme opposition between the abundant physical potency of the dancers and the astonishment of the rising from ashes survivors who saw the dancers as if they were angels. Quote from Kadman. It's difficult to describe a larger opposition from the opposition between the oppression and complete desolation and dominated there, and the beauty and momentum and joy de vivre of our young dancers on the stage. After every performance, the audience crowded around our dancers, looked at them, and as if they were creatures from another world. Angels who had descended from the heavens and even tried to touch them as if they saw to make sure they were dreaming. They were not dreaming, end of quote by Kadman. Here's a photo of the youth who traveled to Prague in 1947, men and women who performed in this trip. Another take about the representative body image in Israeli folk dance troupe is really dedicated to what's called the harmonic dance style, named after the choreographer Yonatan Kalmon, deceased. Kalmon was a choreographer and artistic director of the Dalia festivals and the Carmiel Dance Festival. He was the creator of the archetypical Israeli body language and body image displayed on stages. The model of the representative body was of young, beautiful, strong, shapely, flexible, and full of vitality. The quick upward and lateral gestures express self-confidence and optimism and joy. The barefoot dancing emphasized free movement and direct contact with the ground. The costumes also expressed lightness and fluttering. Reviews of the troops traveling abroad emphasized their faithfulness to the true Israeli spirit. The troops became ambassadors of the Israeli national character, representing kibbutz life, army service, beauty and physical strength in a performative manner. A reviewer of the troops' performance in Mexico wrote, "From the half hour of Israeli dance in the performance of these young dancers, they brought us closer to the spirit of the young Israel, more than kilograms of printed material wood." Now let me talk about Israeli folk dancing in the Israeli Defense Force. So Israeli folk dancing in the army, similar to the Israeli representative troops' performances that effectively demonstrated both the physically aspired Sabra body and the symbolic values of Israeliness, the coupling of Israeli soldiers operating in both warfare and dance indicated a strong link between the physical body and the Israeli collective symbolism. The integration of Israeli folk dancing in the military was integrated both in the participatory dance sessions conducted in the bases themselves, as well in the creation of IDF performing troupe. This activity started during the 1948 war and continued onward to statehood. And from the newspaper, we see some photos of the dancing soldiers. Festival of Dancing Soldiers was held at the end of the folk dancing course. The participants were 60 male and female soldiers from different army units, including the minorities unit. The course was conducted somewhere in one of the army cultural bases. They don't indicate the name. And here we have the program of Palmach El Brigade, Hapotzim Battalion dance performance that was performed only a few days after the end of the War of Independence, and this program is from August 8, 1949. Hapotzim Battalion that excelled in the battle over Jerusalem and broke through the wall was also groundbreaking in Army's cultural life. Today, they will perform Israeli folk dances that became popular among the youth in the past few years. And here is the program itself. Let me move now to the representation of the impaired body. So, folk dances and performances of the impaired body in Israel. The data discussed so far examined the social sites in which Israeli folk dancing emphasized the value of the healthy, strong, young, beautiful, masculine, and heterosexual body, establishing it as a normative standard for the desired symbolic representative Israeli body. The next part analyzes the participation of impaired groups in Israeli folk dancing, whose physical bodies are entirely opposed to the image of the representative Israeli body, including bodies that are unhealthy, deformed, impaired with respect to the normative model. The bodies of the impaired do not pretend to align with the model of the representative Israeli body, but instead seek to be covered in the shade of the collective body and to integrate into it in a way that obscures their physical impairedness and emphasizes their shared ideological values. This is true in the participatory context of open to all dance sessions, but also in the performative level. So the Hoa Galgalim, Hoa on Wheels, is an example of performative group of disabled. The entrance of impaired people into the Israeli folk dancing field began with the integration of members from the center of the Israeli consensus. These are the disabled IDF soldiers. The group was founded by the dance instructor Orly Bao in the 1980s at Beit HaLochem, the Fighters' Home in Tel Aviv, which is a sport rehabilitation center for disabled veterans. Starting off as a dance session for the disabled, supported by healthy women dancers, the group has established a performative troupe called Hoa Galgalim, composed of disabled IDF soldiers performing in their wheelchairs and healthy women partners who dance with them. Here are some photos of the group Hoa Galgalim. Following the success and the cultural legitimacy provided by Hoa Galgalim, other Israeli folk dance sessions for disabled population were formed, including dance sessions for visually and mentally impaired, both for adults and for kids. The special needs sessions indicate the integration of these groups into the symbolic Israeli collective body. Let me talk about elderly who participate in the Israeli folk dancing. So elderly people who participate in Israeli folk dancing pose a clear challenge to the field, which emphasizes youth and vitality. How can one incorporate the elderly physical body that struggles to move and is identified with diasporism and anti-Sabarism into the new Israeli body that was constructed as an opposition to the image of the elderly Jew? An elderly Israeli folk dancer raises this point and suggests a solution based on his own biography. He celebrated his 86th birthday in his regular dance session, which is not for elderly participants only, but open to all public. He says, "When I enter the hall and join the dance circles and see to my happiness that my legs still work and I still can jump and dance, that I forget my age, the atmosphere I was in until now in the nursing home. And I return to the good old days, to the days of my youth, when we danced, my partner and I." End of quote. The history of the Israeli folk dance movement merges into Ariel's personal biography life cycle. For him and for many other elderly participants, this dancing has always been an important part of their lives in childhood, then in youth, in adult life, and continues to onward to old age. In this sense, elderly participants do not represent otherness in the field, but rather embody this practice in their lifelong participation, being part and parcel of the Israeli collective body. Let me talk about LGBT participants in Israeli folk dancing. So in 2007, an Israeli folk dance session was opened for the LGBT community in Tel Aviv. The instructor participated in Israeli folk dancing from a young age, and as an adult gay man, he decided to open a session that fits same-sex couples. This choice conflicts with the heterosexual norms for couples dancing, which is prevalent in Israeli folk dancing. But apart from the same-sex couples dances, all other features of the dance sessions are identical to any regular session, including the gendered instructions in couples dancing. For example, when the instructor announces, "Now the men go inside the circle," then men enter the inner circle next to women who assume the role of men. And when he says, "Now the women go inside," the circle next to men who assume the role of women. When he teaches couples dances, he always dances with a female partner. He explains his choice, quote, "If we make changes, then we'll have a community that is a sort of a ghetto. And I decided on a regular instruction for everyone. People are very used to it. When I say that I think it's regular and standard and it's okay, then they feel that everything is normal." This case study reveals that while the LGBT dancing group operates separately from the general dance session, it still emphasizes the similarities rather than the differences between them. It is open to general participation and not exclusive to LGBT members. It uses well-known repertoire of dances and does so with the same gendered terminology. It follows the typical conservatism of dancing with the same partner over the evening and sometimes over months and years. Clearly, the subversive potential of same-sex couples dancing is not channeled into challenging the social structure or even the heterosexual character of the Israeli folk dance field. The misfit of same-sex bodies dissolves in their aspiration to be included in the symbolic collective Israeli body and in its national, familial, recreational, mainstream activity of Israeli folk dancing. Concluding, ideologically fit, not physically fit. This case study presents a mode of inclusivity of impairedness in the Israeli public sphere. Israeli folk dancing includes physical impairedness next to representative Israeli physicality in a manner that does not offend the latter. This is done by postponing of the physical impairedness and converting it into inclusion within the symbolic collective body. This inclusion is possible due to the two possibilities for physical expression in the field. One is the representative, performative. The second is the open to all participation. The first showcases the perfect representative Israeli body, while the second supports the symbolic collective Israeli body. The latter contains a wide range of personal mobility, including the imprecise and even the impaired. The cultural logic of the Israeli folk dance movement opens this floor for everybody, defines within the borders of the Israeli nation, leaving aside those who are physically fit but are not part of the Zionist discourse, for example, the Jewish ultra-Orthodox or the Arab population, who do not participate in this dancing. The physically impaired do not wish to challenge or undermine the normative body and the movement style, but rather to minimize their differences and imitate as closely as possible the physical gestures of regular dances. They rejoice in joining the cultural activity of the Israeli consensus and are happy to partake in a field they perceive as a promised land of soundness of collective body and identity, reinforcing and reconfirming its normative model. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this talk. I'm happy to be in touch with everybody who wants to talk to me further about it. My email is dina.roginski@yale.edu. Enjoy your conference. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Dina. All right, and I think we will move on now to our final presenter today, Dr. Yali Nativ. So Yali, please feel free to take it away. And you are currently on mute, just so you know.
Thank you.
There we go.
I say good evening, everyone, or good morning or afternoon. It's really nice to be with you, and I really enjoyed these two presentations. I think my talk really relates well with what Dina said, so we'll see about that. I'm going to talk about aging dancers in Israel. So a lot has been written in the last 3 decades about dance, a big load of research, new conceptual artistic theories, body theories and more. And just to clarify, when I'm talking about dance here, I mean theater dance or concert dance, not folk dance. Yet there isn't much reference to the subject of age or aging among dancers. To the issue of experienced, mature, or older dancers, their problematic status in the professional dance arena, the nature of their body practices, traditions, and embodied self-perceptions, their professional and personal artistic experiences, and their professional identity. Moreover, there are no references in the writing, not that I could find, to the subject of social and national contexts and to official policies of financial support from the state in such cases. A quick search for books on the subject of aging dancers finds about 5, all of them published in the last decade, which may indicate that yes, there is some interest in this subject, but it is still definitely not in the center of the discourse. Yet, in the real world, older dancers do exist, many of them choreographers as well, who do perform or have done so in the past in different places and contexts and broke the age rule. And I'm referring here to the Western world, of course. For example, Merce Cunningham, Martha Graham, Anna Halpering, Yvonne Rainer, and Steve Paxton. These are all Americans, and Europeans, Swedish actually, Anna Laguna and Mats Zek, and Charlotta Overholm, just to name a few, some of who performed well into their 80s and 90s. These examples, which are indeed impressive without doubt and without doubt serve as role models, are a result of 2 large historical processes in Western dance. One is the reconceptualization of dance, the dancing body and choreography as an art form that happened during the postmodern era of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And the other is the impact of new critical discourses that are happening today of contemporary and new dance of this millennium. In light of the above, it is interesting to see what's happening in the Israeli case. In 2017, I started an ethnographic research conducting interviews of aging dancers in Israel, or still performing. Most of them are dancers and choreographers who usually perform their own work. And I was surprised to find a large number of people, in fact, more than 35, all between the age of 50 to 85, out of which I interviewed 20. As a dance person myself, arriving at 60, I was curious to understand how aging dancers experience their bodies on stage and off stage in their everyday life, and to hear about daily routines and practices and about the professional self-perceptions. I was also interested to know whether this issue of aging has a place in their artistic work. The dancers I met come from different histories of dance education, aesthetics, and methods of training that are considered successful and are well known locally and some of them internationally. They hold various artistic conceptions and perform in different genres. Yet, they do share one thing, other than their advanced age. They are all operating in the postmodern contemporary arenas. There are so many interesting things that I have learned from them by now and would have loved to share with you, but today I want to share some of my thoughts from a macro perspective and try to address a simple question. How come we have such a large number of active aging dancers operating in the Israeli cultural field? Just for the sake of context, the Israeli dance scene is known internationally as unique, vibrant, and innovative. The number of active choreographers in the scene is exceptionally high. We can look, for example, at these numbers taken from the annual report of the Ministry of Cultural Affairs for the year of 2018, the last one available, which refer only to dance artists and institutions who are supported by the state. You can see that there are some astonishing numbers here, but I would like to point out to the group of independent choreographers. And in fact, the accurate number today is more than 100. And we also have to bear in mind that out of the 80 indicated here, the 80 dance companies that you can see, 11 of them is the number of institutional dance companies, while the rest are in fact independent choreographers as well. We can also look at the number of audiences showing that showing that a third of the performances were done by independent choreographers. This is relevant to aging dancers just because of the simple fact that most of them are included in this group. And again, just for the sake of comparison, we can look at the state of New Jersey, for example, which is close to the size of Israel geographically and demographically, about 8-9 million people. This is a very common comparison somehow, and it's easy to find. It's on the net. And just imagine these numbers in the state of New Jersey: 11 dance companies, over 100 independent choreographers, and over 500,000 people attending dance performances. So let me move to some theoretical backgrounds before I go back to my question. Historically speaking, it is quite obvious that professional dance has maintained an ongoing discrimination towards the aging body over the years, adoring, cherishing, and promoting the ideal, youthful, athletic, perfect, and divine body. It is clear that the origin of these perceptions is rooted in the genre of classical ballet from the modern era, but we definitely can see it also in modern dance, postmodern dance, and contemporary dance as a strong cultural construct. This creates a situation where most professional dancers who work in the institutions need to start their transition out of their performative career in their mid-late 30s and 40s. Sociologists Stephen Weinwright and Brian Turner were among the first to look into the experience of such dancers, and they argue in their work on the Royal Ballet of London that one, youthful bodies in professional ballet companies are idealized, and two, that ballet dancers gain an elite physical capital, which rewards them with high status and distinct self-definition. Nonetheless, they say, because of the short duration of their career, the process of retirement is very problematic and painful in terms of self-identity and future possible professional trajectories. Postmodern choreographer Twyla Tharp, now 81, writes, "For dancers, aging is ever in front of us as we work. We face it each time we enter the studio, one day older than the day before. It doesn't help that gradually, as joints begin to ache and memory to slip, we are bombarded by negative messages from our culture. Older adults are frequently portrayed as out of touch, useless, feeble, incompetent, pitiful, and irrelevant. Sadly, these expectations can become self-fulfilling, creating the bias that fuels our roaring age industry: pills, diets, special cosmetics, surgery, all promising to send time reeling backwards. But no, time goes only one way, forward." To go back to my research, the first question I had to deal with was, how do I define an aging dancer or performer? And this question has to do, of course, as Twyla just said, with the larger issue of what is considered old age today and how it is defined. Without getting into a very, very big and elaborated discussion here, age is discussed through two major points of view: as cultural, intersectional, and conceptual definition, and as a chronological definition. Formally, it is the latter that is used by states and determines age, where in most part of the Western world, the age of 65 is considered officially as the entrance moment to the process of aging. This is still happening in spite of the fact that research shows that life expectancy is on the rise, and people today tend to work well into the late years and therefore retire later as well. Oh, sorry. So how did I decide who will be my aging dancers? Because the institutional and formal approach in the dance world is based on a chronological notion, the age of 30 to 40 is the entrance of professional dancers to the aging category. And because it has such a dominant impact on dancers' lives, I thought it was impossible for me not to take this approach as well. Therefore, my decision was to work with dancers from the age of 50 and on. Yet, I'm saying again, culturally, artistically, socially, and conceptually, it is obvious that this group of people is not homogeneous. And I'm going back to this question: how come we have such a high number of aging dancers in Israel? I will offer two main reasons. The first is historical, and the second is structural, national, and has to do with the cultural policy in Israel. The historical. Israeli dance historian Ruth Eshel describes the circumstances of the birth of dance in then the land of Israel in the beginning of the 20th century, and she says, and I quote, Jewish pioneers who immigrated to the land of Israel in the early years of the Zionist movement were mostly socialists and idealists who came to realize the Zionist ideology, but there were no dance professionals among them. And she adds, in order for concert dance to make its entrance, various things had to happen. Firstly, the resumption of immigration in the early 1920s, at which time the first dance pioneers immigrated to the country. Secondly, the creation of an urban audience appreciative of culture. And thirdly, the renewal of ties with Europe, which was characterized in the post-war period by a surge of avant-garde creativity in the arts. Eshel also mentions two important things. One is that this effort was part of a bigger project of creating a new local Hebrew culture. And the second is that, and I quote, cultural activity was related to the individual's own personal initiative and vision and was not planned or arrived through institutionalized decisions. So what can we learn from this historical scenario? The dance in Israel is relatively young, existing only 100 years or so. That it started as a modern avant-garde initiative seeking innovation and creativity. That one of its dominant aspirations was to construct something new, drawing from local Hebrew and Middle Eastern cultural forces. And lastly, that it was ideologically perceived as an individual-based endeavor. Now, this is obvious that this mechanism stands as a complete opposite to the strong historical tradition and institutionalized aesthetic notions of classical ballet that existed in Europe for hundreds of years and articulated the structure of the aesthetics and ethics of professional dance, creating not only the paradigm of a specific body of professional ballet dancers, but establishing clear formulation of training methods and pedagogical perceptions and practices that exist and continue to this day. But Israeli dance and most of the dancers who came to the country or were born and raised here either lacked or were able to ignore these specific constructs of a systematic cultural agenda and legacy. And by the way, out of the 11 big dance companies in Israel I mentioned before, only one is the Israeli ballet working in the genre of classical ballet. This can be seen also in the way dance education developed and operated in Israel along the years. In fact, I can testify to this from my own personal experience. I was born in Jerusalem in 1958, 10 years after the establishment of the State of Israel. I started dancing when I was 6 years old with the mythological Chassid Levi Agron, a pioneer dance teacher and educator. And my education was totally modern. I actually entered my first ballet class when I was already over 20 years old as a dance student in college. So again, as we can see here, dance education in Israel drew mostly from 20th century early modern and postmodern approaches that clearly dominated the grounds, while the traditional genre of ballet evidently hasn't had a substantial presence. Thus, stressing the fact that dance education and professional dance in Israel have been promoting and embracing modern artistic agendas of breaking the rules and creating alternative embodied aesthetics, movement, and new forms of choreography. The second reason is what I referred to earlier as structural, national, and financial, and has to do with how the State of Israel supports dance artists. Generally speaking, the cultural policy of the State of Israel is to fund artists by devising mechanisms of definitions, criteria, and assessment tools of the work. This system is not free of problems. For example, the budget is at least 5 to 6 times lower than that of similar European states and fails to meet the OECD's requirement of 1% of the gross national budget for culture. Yet there are a few things that are of interest to the case of the aging dancers. The first is the fundamental premise of the state, which is expressed in all the cultural official documents, which is the principle of equality, and I quote, "The support should be provided according to the principles of equality between the various recipients." And then there are two interesting, relatively new state structures for funding that express, I think, the state's current agenda to respond and embrace the situation of aging dancers, choreographers. One is the criteria of veteran choreographers that enter the legal state funding documents, what's called takana, במשרד הבריאות, משרד התרבות, about 7-8 years ago, and is designated basically, and I quote, to a person who has at least 30 years of experience in the field of dance. And the other is a new state organization founded 2 years ago, the Foundation for Independent Artists, which is designed to support, among others, independent choreographers with the goal of increasing, and I quote, the participation of those who come from groups with cultural uniqueness and their accessibility to state funding. So to conclude, very briefly, this unique model, which is based on these two major large axes, the cultural historical and the current national structural financial, creates a solid infrastructure that not only allows aging dancers to keep exploring, working, and creating, but takes an active role in maintaining and shaping their present and future lives. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. And thank you to all of our presenters today. So again, please do send me any questions you might have for the presenters, and I'll make sure to pose those to them. And in the meantime, we do have our first question that's come in. Let me just see if the asker is still here. Laura, I think you are still here. Would you like me to read it, or do you want to ask it yourself?
Either way. You want me to just say what it was?
Sure,
But
yeah.
First of all, thank you so much to everybody. That was just an incredible panel, and I found like all of them were so thoughtful. My question was for Nili for the first presenter, and I was really, first of all, so thank you so much for the paper. Just I've been obsessing over Laura's work, so it was really helpful for my thinking. But I was really curious what your theoretical take would help us with in terms of thinking about the face in terms of Zoom and what happens, in the sense that whether Zoom in particular has that ability to, in some ways, erase the body, but also maybe also combat the gaze potentially, in that we have the power to take ourselves off of the screen, or to use, if we're technologically up for it, to use filters and whatnot, and what impact that would have on the kinds of theories you're thinking about with the face. Thank you.
Feel free to
Yes.
take that, Neely, just unmute.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Laura. Actually, it's a great question, and I'm not sure I I have the significant answer to give, but I do feel that Zoom is referring again to the faces. We used to those boxes that conceal our bodies mostly, and reflect the faces as the dominant cultural arena of encounter, of communication. We are used to think of faces as the main part of our bodies that need to negotiate communication, transfer messages, and sometimes we lose the significance of the other parts of the body in that communication. And Zoom is emphasizing it even more. If we meet in personal, the body maybe will be less visual to us because of a table that we are sitting under or besides. So it's happening also in the outside world, but again, Zoom is emphasizing it. And I think it's a shame in two ways. In one way, I think Zoom teaches us that we need to be all the time visual, or most of the time visual when we communicate. I see that when I'm doing different meeting with other people, today it's not by phone, but it's by Zoom. Even though most of the time we don't need to see the faces, and I think it's a problem because it's consuming our private life also, and we need to be more visual in the public sphere through our houses. And I think we started to negotiate public life differently when we're doing Zoom from our private homes. Like I have a daughter that is sleeping now in a different room, and I was worried that she's going to awaken and cry, and what will I do? So it's a different atmosphere. It's a different way of constructing communication. And on another point, I see as a disabled person that the effect of my appearance is very different when I'm interacting with people in the real world. I don't know how to call it, or in the Zoom. If people don't know me and only know me through Zoom, they have very different experience of me and my identity, because my disability become non-apparent, and it's become an identity that is not clear to other people, even when I'm actually declaring that I'm disabled. The meaning of it is very different when people actually meet me or see me perform to them physically, and including the body, my height, sometimes wheelchair. It depends how I'm performing in that situation. So it's a shame in a lot of ways. As a disabled activist, lecturer, researcher, I feel it's reducing the impact of my interaction in some different levels.
Thank you so much. Let's move on. We have a question here for Yali. Jonathan, did you want to ask the question yourself, or would you like me to pose it on your behalf?
Sure, I can do it. And thank you again to all the panelists. All the papers were so informative. And for Yali, I'm curious, when you approached aging dancers to interview them, first, how did they respond to being designated as aging dancers? And then also beyond that, how did they respond to the idea of your study?
Well, obviously they were very happy that someone is coming to talk to them and hear from them. But there was a lot of negotiation around the word להזדקן or זקנים, because in Hebrew, I call it רקדנים מזדקנים. So aging is much nicer, because in aging, there is this process of, and Rina Scheinfeld, she's one of the oldest dancers in Israel. She's now 83 years old, and she used to dance for Batsheva. Really brilliant dancer. And she said to me, that's a great idea that you want to talk to us, but why are you saying zkenim? Don't say zkenim. Say mitbagrim in Hebrew, yeah? Matured, yeah? So, and also there is, I found some of this debate also in the literature, but basically they loved talking to me, all of them. And well, I didn't touch this at all here, but their answers were very surprising in terms of their approach to their bodies. It was very, very different from everything I read in gerontology in terms of how elderly people perceive their bodies. It's just the opposite. It's quite interesting.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. We actually have a question directed at all of our panelists, but I'm going to allow Dana to ask her question on her own. So just feel free to unmute yourself, Dana, when you're ready.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to everybody here. I had two questions. I'll try to make them briefer because together they're a bit longer. But one is related to the realization, for me at least, it hadn't been as clear until these presentations about the interconnectedness between disability and aging. especially based on research that I've done looking at intergenerational cultural transmission within Sephardi and Mizrahi families on the periphery, and the similarities in which disabled individuals and elderly individuals seem to be regarded similarly according to sociocultural norms, like irrelevant due to certain capacities, inabilities, language, or technology. And I wanted to just ask how, if you have been able to theorize overlaps between aging generations, and disability. And just my other question is about how, with the symbolic and collective inclusion, how, if at all, you've understood non-apparent disability, so lodged in body minds rather than in the physical body. For example, neurodivergence and other non-apparent or shifting apparent, non-apparent, as you just made clear in the comment about Zoom. Thank you.
So I guess it goes to Dina, no? Dina.
Sure, Dina, just unmute and take it away.
I'm not totally sure, Dana, about your last comment. Do you talk about people on the spectrum or something like that?
I guess I'm asking about, in addition to just the physical aspect of disability, like in any way have you been able to look at, like, instead of just body mind, so like chronic illness that may not be visibly, if you're sighted, visibly apparent to others, or let's say learning disabilities, or any kind of sort of emotional, however people refer to it, conditions that are not mobility, necessarily mobility related.
So I will speak about what I know about the Israeli folk dancing. As I mentioned, the open to all sessions have opened some sessions that are targeted towards people with similar abilities. So, even there's for ultra-Orthodox women, it's not definitely a disability, but there's a particular session for women, let's say. So at the same, by the same token, there's a session for people who are mentally, with some mental challenge, or kids and adolescents who have some problems of the similar kinds, let's say. So they are not totally incorporated in the regular sessions, although the repertoire is kind of similar or adapted or adjusted, so they feel that they are dancing the Israeli folk dancing, but in a manner that's a bit more, simple. Or of course, they will not be introduced to the very, very speedy, contemporary dances that are created, but elaborated to help them adjust to the repertoire that does exist in a simple way. So I hope this answers the second question. Regarding the first one, the generational gap or the age factor, as I said in my research, there are many senior or elderly people nowadays who dance Israeli folk dancing, especially around the world. Maybe you will see more elderly than young people. In Israel, there's still a lot of young people dancing, and you will see people in 60s, 70s, 80s who dance. And there's nothing peculiar about that, because it's the same people who danced 30 and 40 years ago. They just keep on dancing. So in this way, I think it's a wonderful way to look at it. There's nothing different about them. They just do the same thing they've done when they were 6, 16, 26, 46, and now they are 66 or 76. So it's a wonderful way actually to transform this, the way we think about it. As I said, it's just a life ongoing practice. There's nothing special about that. So I think it might be a unique perspective about participation of dance in an elderly age.
All right, and do you want to take a stab at that question too?
Yes, if I can add.
Sure.
So it seems also from Dina's presentation that the legitimacy of elderly people joining the circle is different than disabled people. So in this disability community was allowed to enter because of the IDF veterans, the disabled veterans. So it was a very different understanding of who can join the circle and what was the process. There is also different work on aging and disability. There is also the element of disabled people becoming elderly people and what is the meaning of that. And also people without disability or without the label of disability that becoming disabled because it's joined their age. So in elderly people, I think there is the threat of becoming disabled, and you all the time need to negotiate the identity of healthy elderly person because disability considered to be something you want to take away from you. Yeah, sorry, I'm missing some of the words, but it's something that you don't want to acquire, but instead stay healthy even though you become more older. So it's a very difficult issue to communicate disability and join force when we're thinking on activism of disabled people and elderly people. Most of the time it stays separated, even though we can have the same concerns and the issues can be similar in the daily life. So that was on that question, but I want to also add about the non-apparent disability or less apparent disability. So I did a work with Dr. Slava Greenberg that we compared film of disability that conceal the face when it was a physical disability, visual physical disability, and other film of an autistic creator, Dana Dimant, that actually focused, did a close-up on faces because that is what we understood, that because that this disability was less apparent, we needed the close-up as viewers to actually identify the differences in those people visual apparent, and it made a different perspective watching those close-up when it's less apparent disabilities. If you read Hebrew, I can send you the text.
Yali, did you want to take a look at that question too, or should we move on to the next question?
No, I was just thinking where you were talking, Neely and Dina, that when I interviewed the aging dancers, well, what I read in the literature of gerontology is that the discourse of elderly people or aging people is very negative towards the body. They, you know, the discourse is they say, oh, the body is betraying me. I'm afraid to get older. I'm afraid to be disabled or to be dependent on other people. And when I asked the dancers about this, and how they experience, for instance, the fact that they cannot move the way they used to, like Amos Chetz, he's 85 years old, or Ina Schoenfeld, 82, or even Anat Shamgar, she when I interviewed her, she was 63, and she said, you know, I can feel my bones moving, but they never used this pejorative language. They never talked about the body as betraying, and they kind of approached it as an interesting limitation for exploring a new body that can move differently. So one of the things that I found in my research is that they're very interested in going down to the floor, which I think is really fascinating. Instead of, you know, wanting to go up, they are they enjoy being on the floor. And the other thing is slowness. They really investigate the meaning of moving slow or non-movement or micro movement. So they go other directions, but they do use the whatever capability and potential they have in their bodies the way they are now. And all of them, all the 20 of them said that they will never stop dancing until they die. That's what they said. So there's really interesting comparison here for me. Yeah.
Beautifully said. So actually, it turns out that our next question flows directly from what you've just said, all of you. So I'll invite Julia to unmute and to ask her question.
Thank you so much. I've loved all of these papers. I wanted to, Yali, I wanted to ask you in particular about your research, because some of what you're describing, what we were describing just now, this move to the floor, this attention to slowness, this interest in what a different kind of embodiment allows. These are qualities that I find to be really central to the work of a lot of disabled artists.
Right.
And I have been working for some years in relation to the work of UK disabled dancer Claire Cunningham, who does a lot of these particular techniques in her work. So I'm curious whether you think that, I mean, I'm curious whether you have noticed that disability arts is opening up more space, or whether you're noticing your aging dancers as aware of or in conversation with some of the work that's happening in more explicitly disability oriented. I'm thinking particularly of modern and contemporary disabled dancers, right? So folks who are working in the similar kind of space. I see a lot of resonances, but I don't know if those are things that the dancers themselves are thinking about, recognizing. I'm curious about your perspective.
Well, I have to tell you frankly that I didn't hear it from them at all. There was no reference to disabilities, and I didn't ask about it. So, but now when you're mentioning it, I remember that when I used to teach a course on sociology of the body at the Hebrew University. I think, Neely, you were there, were you? No, but anyway, there was an article, I forgot her name, of a woman who had MS, and she, maybe you will know her name. You remember, Neely? I'm really bad with names. Anyway, she describes in the paper the changes that she experienced between the time that she was healthy and then as MS started to get in, and she described in details how she had to plan to move from one place to another, and to cross the corridor, which she used to cross like in a minute, a second, to go somewhere in the house, now takes forever. It takes her 15 minutes to. So when you're mentioning now, I can see the similarity of the slowness and yeah.
Okay, so I know it's late for all of our Israeli friends online today. So we're going to just end with one final question, and that comes from Kessler Physical and Massage Therapy. So if you would like to unmute, you can ask your question now, if you're still here. Just unmute, because we can't hear you right now.
There we go. Okay. So yes, I just one second. Yes, so Dr. El Natif. So I was as a physical therapist, dancer, choreographer, I'm 67, I keep dancing, and I'm wondering, like, how come I'm able to keep doing this? Because like you said, I thought at 35 I'd be done, and then I'm like, well, no, at 40 I'd be done, and I'm like, well, no, 45, and I keep going. And the only thing is of course I can't go audition with you know, and make it, but so I make up my own things now, and I'm performing more than I ever have. But the other thing that happens, it was two things. Well, the other thing that happens is I get body work as a physical therapist. Of course, I know all the different types and somatic work. And I wonder if anyone's looked at that, the longevity of older dancers, how much body work are they getting, how much do they need, as well as of course the disabled, because that gives us all that interoception, that self-awareness of our inner workings. And
Yeah.
I'm just so believe that that keeps us healthier and more mobile, and the more mobile we are, the more able we are to be mobile and dance.
Mhm.
That's probably enough of a question.
Yes, definitely. When one of the things that I was interested in, as I said in my talk, is to understand what they do. And I asked them, what do you do when you get up in the morning? And how do you keep your body routine, your training routine? So one thing that I found is that they all doing their own thing, like you just said. It was very typical. I do my own thing, but their own thing is always based on their tradition of their genre and education and training that they used to do. If they came from ballet, so they would do some kind of a bar work, but not the bar work, you know, as in a traditional class, but they do something else. If they come from somatics, then they do somatics. But the most interesting thing was that I interviewed them in their homes, and everyone had a workspace in the home, and it could be like a huge, large space, like a living room, and it could be like a very, very confined little room, but everyone had a space that they could lie down on the floor and do their whatever routine, daily routine, and it's very, very, very different from one to another. So they do work every day. Yeah.
That's very interesting.
You know, the self-discipline of a dancer who for years, you know, get them in the morning, go to class, any kind of class, that stays with them. They do it. But
Very
they
cool.
create their own methods now.
Great. Well, thank you to each of our panelists. Thank you so much for your time today, for staying to answer these questions, for your wonderfully prepared presentations. And I'm sure that our audience will be in touch if they have questions for you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everybody, and good day to the rest of you.
Good day.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.